OMG, kids aren't like pets. They cost $15K/year. Are you ready emotionally and financially? Think before you plunge into parenting. I have witnessed this countless times. Individuals become overly absorbed in the idea of becoming parents. It resembles bringing a new pet home where everyone feels ecstatic about the novelty. However, I urge you to pause and consider this seriously. Raising children requires a tremendous amount of effort. When individuals become consumed by the fantasy, it often leads to disastrous consequences. If you are not prepared to be a parent, please refrain from having a child. Take this advice to heart. It will simplify your life. I am exhausted by people who choose to have children simply out of excitement or a sense of obligation. Can you financially support a child? Raising children is exorbitantly expensive. The average annual cost is approximately $15,000. That is absurd for just one child. Consider instead that you could invest that money into video games, musical instruments, hobbies, or other pursuits that bring you joy, not to mention emergencies. Emotional readiness. Are you emotionally equipped to care for a child? Seriously reflect on whether you can cope with the sound of a child crying and displaying wild behavior. Are you even in a good place personally? Consult with a therapist regarding your issues prior to starting a family. If that is not possible, seek advice from people on social media. Gather some perspectives first. If your religious beliefs oppose abortion, I understand that it can be a profoundly distressing decision, but sometimes it is necessary. If you are unprepared for parenthood, both you and your child are likely to experience unhappiness. It is crucial not to bring a child into a situation where you know you will struggle. I recognize this may conflict with your beliefs, but the well-being of children should take precedence. Only consider having a child if you are both emotionally and financially prepared. Both aspects must be assessed. Financial considerations. If you are stuck in a dead-end job or focused solely on your education, it is impractical to think you can provide a fulfilling life for a child. The cost of living is exorbitant. You will face significant challenges. Furthermore, having more dependents will only contribute to future societal issues. Education is incredibly challenging in the United States. The notion that one can easily manage student debt is misleading. I have heard numerous narratives of individuals with degrees working at fast food establishments. If you choose to pursue education, consider attending a university in another country. In many developed nations, you won't have to deal with the struggles prevalent in this country. Practice good financial habits. Save, save, save. If you are prone to impulsive purchases and lack a budget, you are not prepared for parenthood. If you are living paycheck to paycheck, you are not ready to have a child. Partner relationship. Being a single parent is incredibly difficult. Trust me. My mother was a single parent, and raising children was a hardship for her. Seek out a compatible partner with whom you communicate well. Aim for healthy discussions rather than screaming matches. Look for someone who is not prone to anger. Additionally, educate yourself on signs of narcissism and relationship abuse. Seek guidance from resources like ChatGPT or educational videos. Just make sure you're informed. Ensure your partner is truly the right person for you. A red flag is if they become visibly uncomfortable when you request access to their phone. I openly share everything with my partner, and we both find it works since we are both socially anxious. We do not need to worry about infidelity. However, if you or your partner is more extroverted, discomfort around phone access could signal a trust issue. Do not make this a frequent request, but if they are uneasy about a simple request, it may indicate they are hiding something. It is important to approach this casually and not too often, as a deceptive partner may prepare in advance to conceal their infidelity. Many individuals are trapped in toxic relationships, often discovering their partner has been unfaithful, leading the child to navigate the emotional manipulation of two competing parents. This competitive dynamic causes confusion and distress for the child, making them feel responsible for the situation. Be ready for a special needs child. Conditions such as autism, ADHD, OCD, depression, and chronic illness can run in families. It is vital to gather as much information about your family's health history as possible. You might end up parenting a child who requires constant care, bringing with it lifelong responsibilities. Consider getting an ancestry DNA test. While it may be costly, it could provide valuable insights into your genetic background. Ensure that your genetics are conducive to raising a healthy child. You should never want to bring a child into the world knowing that you have chronic illnesses that might be inherited. No one can predict with absolute certainty if their child will face severe challenges like profound autism or cerebral palsy. But if you sense an increased risk of passing on harmful genetic traits, please choose adoption instead. You would fundamentally alter a child's life for the better by choosing them. Although they may not be your biological child, the significance of blood ties should not overshadow the opportunity to provide a loving home. In my view, that act makes you a hero, provided you are emotionally mature and financially prepared. Foster care system the sentiment of, "I don't want my child anymore, I will simply put them up for adoption," is naive. Foster care is overwhelmed with children, and there is a substantial chance that they will not accept your child, leaving you with no choice but to raise them. You're likely to feel trapped. Don't lose hope, but seeking assistance can feel like waiting indefinitely for housing support. Safe sexual practices use condoms. Although they might be costly, they are still more affordable than raising a child. Consider a permanent form of contraception. Men, contemplate a vasectomy. Your sperm can be preserved for many years. Women should weigh the risks associated with childbirth. Although it is a natural process, complications do exist, and the experience is often painful. You should not feel obligated to become a parent merely out of duty. Live your life for yourself. After childbirth, many women struggle with body image issues, even if they remain beautiful. Childbirth can change your perception, leading to feelings of anxiety and sadness. I suggest considering sterilization. However, if you remain uncertain, birth control is also a viable option, though it may require trial and error to find the right fit. Keep in mind that hormonal birth control can impact your mental health, and if you wish to avoid the complications of that path, it may be wiser to explore permanent options. Education, regardless of your attempts to instill values and morals in your children, there is always the possibility that they could develop in ways you never anticipated. That is the essence of the fantasy you might be imagining. Children are innocent and malleable, but they also possess their own thoughts and feelings. The internet provides a wealth of diverse perspectives that can shape their beliefs. You may have a degree of influence, but not complete control. Gentle parenting if you are inclined to resort to shouting or physical discipline. Do not consider having a child. Explore the principles of gentle parenting and view educational videos on the subject. It would benefit prospective parents to take parenting classes before starting a family. Prioritize mental health. It is a critical factor. Many individuals fail to recognize its importance, causing psychological harm to children, which leads to serious repercussions down the line. Trial with pets. A good way to determine your readiness for parenthood is by caring for a high-energy, large dog breed such as German Shepherds, Malamutes, or Huskies. These dogs require significant attention and effort. If you struggle to handle such breeds, you are likely not prepared for the demands of a child. Children can be much more challenging and costly to raise. If you can manage one dog but struggle with two, consider this a warning. Having one child is considerably more difficult than managing two challenging dogs. With pets, you have the option to find them a new home without the same level of legal repercussions you would face with a child. The commitment required is considerably less intense. Engaging in pet care can serve as a test of your ability to handle the responsibilities of parenthood. Once you have a child, relinquishing that responsibility can be exceedingly difficult and carries legal implications. The laws governing the treatment of pets differ significantly from those concerning children. I do not intend to suggest that children are inherently negative. However, the world is becoming increasingly costly and challenging to navigate. A single individual can barely manage on their own in today's economy. Social media can exacerbate feelings of alienation, sadness, addiction, and isolation. Many children come into this world unexpectedly and face hardships because their parents were unprepared. Although I do not have children myself, I have observed this pattern in others and seen the transformations that parenthood can bring. You should carefully consider your choices. While you are welcome to disagree with me and present the positives of parenthood, I am not claiming that children are entirely undesirable. Rather, I encourage thorough research before making such a life-changing decision. Do not fear the necessity of abortions. They can be essential. Prioritize your mental health and pursue what brings you happiness. Your well-being should take precedence because if you are struggling with sadness, how can you cultivate a joyful environment for your child? They will likely internalize their parents' struggles and may also suffer from similar feelings. I am not being unkind. My aim is to prompt reflection on the reality of parenting. We live in 2025, not in a time when communities collectively raised children. Unfortunately, that sense of communal support is largely absent today, and individuals are left to navigate a challenging economic landscape. Exercise caution and cultivate happiness in your life. Remember, you are not acting selfishly. You are embracing life on your own terms. Story 2. I thought I was alone, then opened up to my family about struggling. They dismissed me, proving I really have no one in my corner. Trigger warning: self-harm, previous suicide attempt, abuse during my childhood. I was compelled to attend therapy sessions where we were instructed to monitor our emotional states weekly. We were also asked to evaluate our feelings each day on a scale from 1 to 10. I deceived them consistently because I had never experienced joy or curiosity. Every day for me fell within the range of 1 to 4. I did not understand back then that joy was an emotion some people could feel more than once in their lifetime. I was unaware that some individuals experience 10 out of 10 days regularly. Each morning, I awaken feeling either overwhelmed and anxious if there are tasks at hand or empty and lonely if there are not. My emotional palette consists primarily of fear, anger, and shame. The only positive emotion I have ever felt is pride when receiving recognition, as love from others has only ever been shown when I accomplished something. However, that feeling is short-lived since I believe I do not deserve any of it. If people were aware of my true self, they likely would not even grant me that much. I have never felt entirely at ease around others. Whenever I have found a fleeting moment where I believed being vulnerable was acceptable, the other person disapproved of what they discovered. I relocated to a new city following college for a job, where some of my closest friends, who had been in a relationship for years, resided. For once, I genuinely maintained a positive outlook. I was ready to embark on a fresh start. A few months later, though, I found myself struggling like never before in my adult life, which frustrated them. They claimed I was not making enough effort to befriend her childhood friends, which her partner had done. I felt utterly alone in this new city except for them. Gaining acceptance from her friends felt like a matter of survival. However, they did not accept me. I later learned that they disapproved of how I interacted with her boyfriend, who was the only person willing to converse with me after persuading me to join them, despite initially feeling unwanted. I never desired a relationship with a man, including him. She clearly wanted me out of the picture, and after ignoring me on my birthday, initially declining to celebrate, but then inviting her friends who disliked me, I lost my temper. I was quite inebriated and told them that I hated them. The following day, I extended my apologies, stating there was no justification for my behavior. It was genuinely challenging to do, but I did not hate them. I wanted them to understand that. I don't think I had ever truly experienced guilt before. She sent me an extensive text outlining all her grievances about me. He supported her sentiments. They both expressed concern for my well-being, which was supposedly their rationale for their actions. I contemplated suicide for the first time since childhood. I do not expect anyone on Reddit to care. I have a pet who is the only living being I have ever genuinely loved, and despite her deserving better, I would not abandon her. It became clear to me that nobody has ever truly cared for me, and I still wonder how I could have been foolish enough to believe otherwise. I realized that everything I despise about myself is not merely a figment of my imagination, as I had previously convinced myself in recent years. Those who get close enough to notice these flaws also harbor disdain for me. Looking back, I see that what I said was not as significant as I believed. They had both transgressed in worse ways during our acquaintance. Yet she wanted me gone, and pity was insufficient for him to defend me. I recently returned home for a visit. I'm not sure why I did. It never concludes positively. This time, however, was distinct. I am genuinely finished with the cycle. My mother, who has long struggled with severe mental illness, would enter any room I occupied, hurling insults at me over trivial matters, like leaving the garage door open when she was the one who had done so. I learned that my brother was also planning to visit. I had not seen him in years, as I detest the dynamics when we are all together. I am not permitted to discuss my life because it makes my twin brother feel inadequate since he has not graduated from college or found employment. There might be some truth to that, as on the rare occasions they grow angry with him, they question why he cannot simply accomplish what I have. He resents me for it. Every one of his achievements, no matter how insignificant, gets celebrated, and every discussion tends to revolve around him, with conversations about me ending abruptly to address whatever daily crisis he may have. They claim he requires more support because he is struggling. So I express to them for the first time that I am genuinely struggling and have been for a considerable period. I shared how I have been unable to eat or sleep. I laid bare everything challenging I have faced. I suppose it had never dawned on them that these difficulties might lead to my sadness, including the loss of a friend. It is more likely that they simply do not care because I am perceived as successful, even though my success seems to provoke resentment in my mother and provide reassurance to my father. My mother became furious, accusing me of being selfish for voicing my struggles and insulting me with hurtful names. My father only looked at me with disgust. My brother later confided that he does not respond to my calls because he does not like me, particularly after I expressed concern to my mother regarding his risky driving while impaired. She accused me of snitching on him. Whenever he treated either me or her poorly due to his substance abuse, she would calmly discuss matters with him, but every time I confided my struggles or left the garage door open, she would unleash a torrent of insults. It hit me that I am genuinely and completely alone in this world. No one cares about me, not even those who should love me unconditionally. If they cannot tolerate me, no one else will either. I have tried to change. I believed I had made progress over the past decade, but each attempt only worsens the situation when the outcome still remains insignificant. For the past month, I have carried this torment with me. Each day is dreadful. I have tried to persuade myself to go out and engage in activities that normal people partake in, to lead a life, possibly meet new individuals, yet the mere thought of facing potential rejection terrifies me. I have given up. I no longer wish to subject myself to that anxiety. Life becomes much less tumultuous when you do not interact with others, especially when the few high moments are not truly uplifting, and you are just biding your time until the next setback. There have been periods that felt less unbearable, and others that mirrored the same level of despair. I have attempted therapy and experimented with various psychiatric medications. I am simply exhausted from it all. Everything continues to become more challenging. I have lived a relatively simple life. I hail from an affluent family. I have had the opportunity to travel, attended prestigious educational institutions, and began my journey with no debt. I understand that my life isn't particularly difficult. I recognize that I am weak, lazy, and inherently flawed, and people will always perceive that. My mother has claimed since my childhood that I am evil, that I harbor the devil within. In truth, I am not evil. I care deeply for every living being. I used to pray for every flock of Canada geese I encountered, pleading for their safety after my father accidentally hit one crossing the road. I was completely and utterly fearless as a child. I cannot pinpoint when that changed. My teachers were bewildered by my unwillingness to comply with their requests. They suspected I might have a mental challenge and arranged for me to be screened for autism, and my IQ was assessed. It turned out to be exceptionally high, and I do not have autism, so they dismissed the notion. It did not occur to them that my home environment was violent and that I was acting out because my mother used to drive me and my brother to school daily, declaring how marrying our father and bearing us had been the gravest mistake of her existence. She shared inappropriate details about her relationship with my father with us at tender ages. On 2 occasions, she strangled me until I lost consciousness. My brother seemed to find solace in her negative attention being directed at me, and I cannot hold that against him. It broke my heart to see her treat him cruelly, and I have always tried to intervene. To this day, he has never defended me. He became aggressive, self-centered, and dependent on substances that would allow him to escape sobriety, my twin. I have become what my mother labeled me. I have uttered the most hateful words to my family and have acted violently towards them. Nobody can stand me. I hold no bitterness toward them. It is simply that I lack empathy, and I believe people can sense that. I excel in my career and education. I am adept at forging superficial connections. I am physically appealing. Yet, a mere glance at my forearm reveals the truth about my nature, so I do not allow anyone to get close enough to discover that. It has been this way since I turned 14. I was enrolled in therapy as a prerequisite to avoid expulsion from my prestigious boarding school when my grades slipped for the first and only time in my life. They were oblivious to any of this. My parents must know they have witnessed the scars. However, they have never brought it up. I supposedly recovered and have not faced any issues since, according to their perspective. That Christmas, I received no gifts due to my academic struggles. My brother once injured my father, causing a rib fracture that led him to the hospital, yet he still received presents 2 weeks later at the age of 16. I have never articulated all of this in writing, let alone shared it with anyone. I simply cannot afford to keep searching for a therapist who offers nothing but empty reassurances. I doubt I would ever trust anyone enough to share this with them. No psychiatric medication has assisted me. Xanax is the only substance that has ever granted me peace, but I was only permitted a month's supply. I am trapped like this and must endure whatever remaining years of life lie ahead because I am simply that weak. Ida reviewing how whiny and self-centered this sounds makes me laugh. Story 3. WTF. I went from straight rugby dude to getting a blow job during a wild party with my gay best friend and a bunch of hot guys. I have always identified as heterosexual, but consider myself a person who remains open-minded. I have exclusively dated women, but I have had many gay friends throughout my life, and their orientation has never bothered me. My first experience with a man was quite overwhelming. I had recently ended a 5-year relationship with my girlfriend and found myself feeling quite miserable. We had lived together, and due to a series of events, I needed to move out unexpectedly, so I began living with one of my closest friends, Joe, who happens to be gay. When I first moved in, I was in a rather depressive state, and Joe, being a caring friend, consistently checked in on me, encouraged me to go to the gym, and pushed me to leave the house to maintain my rugby practice. Thanks to Joe's focus on fitness and his dedication to working out, I got into the best shape of my life. Often, he would snuggle up in bed with me to watch movies and order takeout. Nothing intimate occurred, we were just friends, and as I mentioned, I am straight. At that time, I lacked any sexual desire, although I was somewhat envious of my housemate's libido. He frequently had guys over, and thanks to our thin walls, I could hear everything. He tolerated my sulking, but after 6 months, he began to offer some tough love, insisting that I needed to stop feeling sorry for myself and get out there to have sex with someone. Eventually, after Joe introduced me to Tinder, I matched with a rather attractive woman and decided to go out with her. To be really honest, it was the first time in months that I actually felt a spark of desire. This was likely because Joe had spent the entire day talking about the best oral experience of his life, combined with the flirty messages and pictures I had received from the girl. Anyway, I went out on the date, and while the girl was very nice and undeniably attractive, she seemed genuinely interested in a date, rather than anything that could lead to sex. After a few drinks, I returned home a bit tipsy but feeling down about myself and desperate for some relief. My housemate, however, had not expected me back at that hour because as soon as I got home, I found Joe engaged with a young Latino man who was moaning rather loudly. I froze momentarily, taken aback by the sight. Joe and I, along with some other friends, had watched adult films before, gone skinny dipping, and I was accustomed to communal showers with other guys due to rugby, but I was at a loss for how to react in this situation. Joe, in his typical way, said, "Unless you're going to join, get lost, dude." Without even pausing his movements, I hastily retreated to my room. Apparently, my entrance heightened the atmosphere, and they began making even more noise. Considering that I had always thought of myself as straight, I was about 30 years old at that time. All of it overwhelmed me, and I found myself releasing my erection, indulging in the sounds of their activity. We laughed about it the next morning, and Joe teased that the next time, I should join in and that he would eventually turn me gay. Throughout that week, he had several different guys over for casual encounters, and each time, I would pleasure myself while listening to the sounds. Fast forward to that weekend, which was set to be my rugby finals, Joe informed me he was hosting one of his infamous parties at our place. I had attended these parties before. They always featured a mix of attractive women, gay men, and straight men, all very aesthetically pleasing. Over the years, I had gone to these parties, but the straight guys would typically leave early in the evening as things tended to get wild later on. After losing our final match, I went out drinking with my rugby teammates and invited them back to Joe's party. Arriving drunk around 10 p.m., the party was in full swing. Joe had invited all his dancer and artist friends over, and everyone was having a fantastic time drinking, dancing, smoking marijuana, and enjoying themselves. I wandered out back where there was a beer pong table and ran into the Latino gentleman I had caught in a compromising position the other night. He smiled and remarked, "You seemed to enjoy yourself watching the show the other night." I chuckled, apologized, and we chatted for a while. I could sense he was flirting with me, which I found somewhat pleasing, but I eventually moved on to converse with one of my friends. As the night continued, we all grew progressively intoxicated, and I partook in smoking marijuana. We transitioned to playing a game that was essentially a mix of strip poker, take a shot, and remove an article of clothing. By this point, the crowd had diminished. Most of my rugby friends had left, a few women still lingered, and the gay men were becoming quite physical with one another, making out in various states of undress around the house. I lost a round of the game and was down to just my shirt. Joe was clad only in his underwear, and some people were left in just their socks. The Latino guy was in his shorts and was definitely eyeing me up again. Fueled by alcohol, marijuana, and the explicitly charged ambience, I started feeling very aroused, and all I could envision was the Latino man's perfectly rounded backside being penetrated by Joe's large member. For some reason, I decided to excuse myself to my room at this point and ended up dozing off for about 2 hours. When I awoke, I felt the need to relieve myself. As I stepped out into the living area, I found Joe sitting on the couch completely naked, high on marijuana, watching as his friends were all entangled in passionate interactions, dry humping and getting quite intense. He caught sight of me and beckoned for me to join him on the couch, saying, "There you are, you little slacker. Where have you been?" I sat down beside him, noticing his flaccid penis resting against the couch, and he handed me a joint. I took a puff while observing the collection of fit, toned bodies grinding against one another. I had always left the party long before it got to this stage, but I was astonished by how liberated everyone appeared. While I consider myself open-minded, I had never seen straight men engaging in such behavior. I noticed one of my rugby teammates in the corner, clad in just his underwear, with one of Joe's dancer friends perched on his lap, exposing her breasts. He gave me a thumbs up. The arousal returned, and I felt myself becoming semi-erect. I glanced over at Joe, who had begun to stroke himself. He noticed the developing bulge in my pants and grinned at me. Suddenly, a well-built ginger dancer, wearing a tight white shirt and denim jeans, dropped down onto his hands and knees and began to orally pleasure Joe, right beside me. Joe grasped the back of the guy's head and guided him up and down his shaft. Saliva was everywhere, and the guy struggled to take it all in. I became fully aroused. My member, which is quite sizable as well, although not as large as Joe's, was pressing hard against the waistband of my underwear. Looking up, I spotted the Latino guy, whose name I later learned was Raf, standing across the room. He had been dancing with one of the remaining women, but was now gazing at me, then at Joe, and noticed the damp area of pre-ejaculate that was forming on my underwear. He took a step closer, hesitated, and for a moment I felt my heart race, but with the sounds of Joe moaning nearby, I could not resist. I nodded at Raf, and he came over, kneeling before me. He first kissed my neck, then descended to my nipple, which was the final trigger that caused my erection to burst forth from my underwear, slapping against my abdomen, just below my sternum. Without hesitation, Raf slid his tongue down my shaft and then took my entire length into his mouth, plunging to the base. I swear, at that moment, my mind went blissfully blank. No woman had ever managed to take me fully in, and my ex-girlfriend despised giving oral pleasure. He kept going, and due to the effects of the marijuana, it felt like it took an eternity, but the sensation was incredibly intense. Suddenly, Joe rose, seized the ginger guy, who by this point was shirtless and had his jeans undone, pushed him down onto the couch and began pleasuring his backside. The guy was moaning uncontrollably, and Joe's face was buried deep in him. Meanwhile, Raph continued to stimulate me, and he glanced at me while looking toward Joe, giving me a look that seemed to ask, "Do you want to?" I shook my head, and he appeared disappointed but maintained his actions. Joe resurfaced for a moment, grinned at me, and grasping his member, inserted it into the ginger guy. The ginger let out a moan and twisted to observe me receiving oral pleasure, while Joe began having sex with him. At that moment, I experienced a wave of clarity where I recognized that I was a straight man, caught in the middle of an almost entirely homosexual orgy, watching my best friend engage in sexual activity with a ginger guy on the same couch where I previously witnessed him with the man who just provided me with the most incredible oral experience of my life, while my straight rugby friend was dry humping a stunning dancer girl. I started to tremble, first in my legs, then surging up through my spine, and suddenly, I erupted. I experienced the most intense orgasm of my life. I grasped Raph's head and pushed it down harder. I continued to shake as he withdrew, still climaxing in sheer ecstasy. Raph started to pleasure himself, reaching his own orgasm. I grabbed a random shirt beside me to clean myself up and tossed it to Raph. My recollection is a bit hazy, but I distinctly remember getting up to relieve myself. In a daze, I navigated through the living room, passing all the activity, collapsed into bed, and enjoyed the finest sleep I had experienced in months. While I still identify as straight, having been dating a few women in recent months, I certainly don't mind Joe hosting parties. I have written a book detailing more of this story for anyone who might be interested. https www.amazon.com/dpb0dwnzdpkf fbclid equals euzx0bgnhzw0cmta r20d6tq7hhmbibg2p oliked it hbl66h6gz3xftdtx0. Story 4. 7 years later, I ticketed the builder's car repeatedly for parking violations, thousands in fines for mocking a disabled lady. OMG. This is a narrative about an individual receiving the karma they justly deserve after several years. Years ago, I was employed in the delightful field of retail. Unfortunately, it is quite common to encounter a continuous stream of unpleasant customers that make you wish they did not exist, and some are so atrocious that their actions are permanently etched in your memory. Thankfully, one of these unforgettable encounters provided me the opportunity to exact my revenge. I had only spent 1 year working at this newly established store and was beginning to feel comfortable. I started to become acquainted with the wonderful customers while realizing that some people should not be allowed in public places. As a shy person who dislikes confrontation, this was not ideal, but at least one of my customers was a truly lovely elderly woman who always took the time to chat and brought me immense joy. It had been several weeks since I last saw her, but one morning, I noticed her car parked in the disabled parking space, as she has a blue badge. This time, however, she emerged from her vehicle using crutches with a cast on her leg. I did not get a chance to speak with her before a work truck, which did not display a blue disabled badge, pulled into the adjacent disabled space. Out jumped a builder in his early 40s accompanied by his teenage child. This little old lady was not going to tolerate this, and with remarkable courage, confronted this rude builder, politely informing him that he shouldn't park there since it was designated for the disabled, and he did not possess a badge. What transpired next is seared into my memory. This builder chose to humiliate and degrade this poor elderly lady on crutches, accusing her of feigning her disability and claiming that the cast on her leg was fake, suggesting she was exploiting the benefits system for as much money as possible. He then walked away, dramatically limping and laughing with his teenage child while the elderly woman stood there in disbelief. Regrettably, as someone who lacks bravery, I did nothing to intervene, a decision that has haunted me ever since. I made a feeble attempt to ask a manager later to take action, but they showed no interest or desire to engage. For years, I continued to work at this store, repeatedly seeing this despicable builder come and go. Luckily, I never interacted with him directly, but I saw him frequently and recalled his disgraceful behavior every time. I would still see him occupying the disabled spaces, eventually recognizing him by the large blue Mercedes he drove. 7 years later, I was still employed at the store, and this disgraceful individual continued to park in the disabled spots, looking as obnoxious as ever. However, that year, I was fortunate as our store received some excellent equipment. Due to the numerous complaints, our store hired a company to address parking violations. Rather than having external parties come in to issue tickets, the store staff were given ticketing machines, and it became our responsibility to monitor the parking lot and log any vehicles violating the rules. This was all conducted digitally, and no paper tickets were placed on cars. This was fantastic. As soon as I learned of this system, I knew exactly what I would do. It did not take me long to familiarize myself with the machine, and quickly, the opportunity to take my revenge arose. There were 3 parking rules, and each violation resulted in a delightful £80 fine. The first rule was no parking in the disabled spaces without a badge. I was well aware that the builder was definitely violating this rule. It was not long before I spotted him again, and as he entered the store, I swiftly hurried outside with the ticketing machine. Sure enough, there was the oversized blue Mercedes parked in the nearest disabled space, without a badge. I recorded the vehicle details, took some well-placed photos, and submitted the report so that he would receive a pleasant letter informing him of his fine. That was not the end of it. Fortunately, it took weeks for him to finally receive the ticket, giving me the chance to continuously document his parking violations. As expected, he continued to park in the disabled spaces. Since I worked at the front of the store, I always knew upon his arrival. After ticketing his vehicle numerous times, he eventually learned a lesson, as his oversized blue Mercedes stopped appearing in the disabled parking spots. But true to form, he found a new target parking in the child spaces. The second rule stated that one should not park in child spaces without a child. Had he finally learned? Of course not. He continued being obnoxious, parking in the child spaces which were already limited. By this time, I had memorized all of his vehicle details and took great pleasure in filling out the ticket machine as I approached his car parked improperly in the child spaces, including photos that showed no child seats present. As it became routine, I continued issuing tickets over the following weeks, and eventually he began to receive fines. Fortunately, I am quite unobtrusive and go unnoticed, so I was never caught or recognized. However, as is the case with all good things, this eventually came to an end. When this builder came into the store, I noticed his oversized blue vehicle was no longer parked in the child spaces or the disabled areas. Had he finally learned? You would not be surprised to know that he had not. It did not take long for me to track him down again. The third rule mandated that one must park within a marked space. Surprise, surprise, the builder still managed to mess this up. He would park over the line, taking up 2 spaces. Well, guess what? That was perfect ammunition for my ticket machine, having difficulty parking in the taxi space with his oversized vehicle. Boom, he wasn't parked within a designated area, and catching another ticket for him. A single wheel slightly over the white line of a parking space. That was right, this scumbag had technically violated the rule. Thus began another few weeks of fun until eventually, he ran out of new ways to infringe upon the rules, prompting our company to hire external agents to start ticketing vehicles, resulting in my treasured tool for justice being set aside. I am well aware that some may argue these fines are not enforceable for various reasons. I genuinely do not care for several reasons. First, I was being compensated for this work, so at the very least, my time and effort were not wasted. Second, it did indeed have an impact as they repeatedly altered their parking habits. Third, even if they did not end up paying the fines, they still faced significant time and hassle trying to contest each one, enduring constant harassment via mail. Overall, if all the fines were tallied and summed, they would amount to thousands of pounds in penalties accumulated over time due to this individual's poor behavior. As an added note, approximately 3 years later, I walked by this vile individual in the parking lot and watched as he yelled at an innocent man in a high-visibility jacket, accusing him of being the source of all his parking tickets. This brought me satisfaction. knowing that this must have affected him deeply and caused him to still be irate after 3 years. In summary, I issued numerous small parking fines, accumulating to thousands of pounds for the disrespect shown to a disabled woman several years ago.